Hello guys, and welcome back to another episode of the procedure series for MCreator. Today what we're going to be looking at is a very unique kind of block that is found under the entity procedures data, and if you scroll a little bit down, there is one called get UUID of and then the event/target entity. So this one basically allows you to specify very specific entity based on their UUID. Now every entity in the game has a UUID, even the pigs or players and stuff like that. So you can use this block pretty much for anything that you need entity related. Now when it comes to using the block, it becomes a little bit more harder to work with because there isn't a way to set a UUID, but you can test for a UUID. So basically what you need to do is something a little bit more advanced, and that's kind of what we're going to be working on today. Now, before we get started, I will go into game and quickly show you what the UUID of an entity would look like, and then you can kind of get an idea of what that block actually does. Alright, so let's go ahead and just get the data of this entity right here. So we're going to go /data, and then we're going to get and then entity, and then we're going to get the entity here. Now this code right here is the entity UUID. So basically when we're going to be testing for an entity, it's copying this basically as a string, and then when we can test for that same string later on. But basically that's what the UUID is. It would be that long string here, and it's basically coded up into a bunch of stuff. So every entity has a unique one, which is what the U stands for, unique entity ID, or something like that. And basically even players have a UUID. It's a different format, but it is still a string. So what we'll be doing today is basically making something like this. And as you can see here, every entity around here, so the chicken, the pig, cow, the gray sheep, are all following the brown sheep here, and if they pathfind out, they get told to go back towards the brown sheep. So they're always constantly following the brown sheep, and like this chicken, he's gonna, maybe not, so chicken was out of bounds and then he decided to follow. So that's basically what's going on here. You can basically right click and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and pop into game and see how I did this. This is all using the UUID and something else that we'll be covering today, which is vectors, at least a little bit of it. So we'll be taking a look at that. All right, so let's save and go into our first one. So we have when entity clicked. This is setting up a very basic script here for when we right click on an entity. We're testing if that entity is allowed. Now I do have a global variable or a tag here for entities. I have it allowed entities, and I have it set to pig, cow, chicken, and sheep. And basically what I'm doing with this procedure here is I'm testing if any of those entities are being right clicked on using that particular tag. After that, I'm testing if the player's source entity, being the player, has a stored UUID. So basically what this is basically a way for me to set up two states. One state being I'm going to get the UUID of the player, and the other state, which is the else, which is basically me applying it to that particular entity. So if it's empty, that means we don't have a UUID. So we need to get that UUID of that entity. So what we do is we set that variable to the event/target entity UUID. So this is the block that we just looked at before. And then we're printing out just a quick message to the action bar, which is a stored entity UUID. After that, if it isn't empty, which at this point it won't be, what we'll do is the next click that we right click on an entity with, we're going to set the follow entity MBT variable, and then we're going to apply that to our source entity, which is our stored UUID, which is what we got up here. And then we're resetting this stored UUID to be empty, so we can redo this another time. And then lastly, what we're doing is we're just adding a entity, or printing out a message saying added entity UUID to entity. And then that's over. We don't need to worry about anything else in this particular script when we're right-clicking on the entity. The rest happens when the entity is actually ticking. So this is where this one kind of comes into play. And it looks a lot more overwhelming than it actually is. I will explain each part. But before we do that, I need to explain a little bit about vectors. So vectors are basically a string of text, or not really text, but numbers. Basically what you would have with this kind of vector, it has three types of vectors. So your X, Y, and Z. These can be any particular number if you really consider it. You can store three types of numbers in this case. So it's very similar to an array. MCreator doesn't have arrays particularly, but best thing to kind of see it as three variables grouped together into one thing. So this is basically three numbers, and they have separate slots, and we can test for those specific numbers. So that can be coordinates, that could be just regular numbers, it could be other values as long as they're a number format. So far as I can tell, this is going to be a float, which is basically a decimal point one. So just because it says 6 here, it probably would work with 6.5 and stuff like that as well. So, you know, you could do a lot with this particular vector thing here. Now, you can find vectors under math, and then there's one down here. We're basically created three vector variables here and a string variable called value. I don't think I actually use the string variable, so we can get rid of that. So we have target entity, which is the entity that we're going to be targeting, the event entity, the position of basically where that entity is searching for the other entity, and offset, which basically is just allowing us to take all those coordinates that we have and then basically subtract or add 16. This gives us a cube size of 32 by 32 if we use this particular block. Now, we did cover the follow entity except and then the block here. So what this one basically does is, if you're not familiar, watch last week's video. And to summarize, we're just searching for everything in this particular area for a entity of a certain type. So we're using the event/target entity as an exception because we don't want to test for the same entity, but we do want to know where everything is. So we have these components, which are called X component of, and then we're using vectors. That's under here. It's these ones right here. And then what we have is the adding and subtracting one. That's this block here. We have a few different values that we can work with: adding, subtracting, and multiplication. So we just need to subtract our range, our offset, which is 16. So we're doing this for all of the different types of coordinates. And then what we're doing is we're doing an offset for the positive direction. So this is a 32 by 32 block area that the entity will be searching for. After that, what we're doing is we're going to basically search for the follow entity. So if the follow entity is the same as the iterator, so iterator is here, and if it's the same as that particular UUID, then what we're doing is we're going to set the target entity, we're going to get the position of the iterator, and then what we're doing is we're checking if that distance is greater than 4. So you can control how far and how close the entity is by this value. I set it to 4 because that's 4 blocks, and that should be generally good enough for the distance. Now, it could be a little bit different. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't tested the distance completely to see if it's like in block form or if it's like, I don't know, the actual diagonal count as distance. But 4 is how close you were seeing it happen. We could set this to 8 or something like that, and then they have a little bit more freedom to walk around and stuff too. And what we're doing is we're checking the distance between the event entity and the target entity. So we're checking for the vector between those two. After that, we're just setting the pathfinding to the target entity, and we're setting the walk speed to 1. So this is a pathfinding block that can be found under the enter procedures actions, and then it's near the bottom here. We have the should be near the bottom. Give me a second to find it. Maybe it's near the top. No, it's probably near the bottom. Let's see here. Attempt to make, yeah, so it's this one right here. Attempt to make find event/target and find a path to move to. And then we're just basically applying the component X, Y, and Z, and then the vectors for the target entity. And we're making sure that it's happening for the event/target entity, not the source entity, because that's the, or we don't actually have source entity with this one. We're not using the entity iterator, because that would mean that we would be targeting the entity that we're actually going to and telling it to go to the same coordinates. We don't want to do that. We want to actually go to the entity that's searching to go to the actual coordinates. So we use the target entity ones here. Now there was a little bit of stuff that I skipped over up at the top here. So basically what we have is we're testing for 2 things at the very top. So the first thing is we're testing for our tag for our entities. So we're making sure that it's any of those entities that we can basically run the script for. And we're testing if the value for the follow entity is not empty. So as long as it's filled out with a UUID and the entity is basically one of those values, then what we do is we get the position of the current entity, the one that we're wanting to actually follow something. And then what we do is we set our offset, and then everything else happens like I described. So that's pretty all there is to it. And let's go ahead and demonstrate this now of how it basically works, because it's actually kind of really cool. All right, so I have a lead in my inventory just in case there's an entity that kind of strays away from our target entity. We don't generally want that to happen, so what we're going to do is we're just going to place down some kind of creature, and then we're going to get another creature here, and what we're going to do is we're going to right click on the creature that we want to follow, and then click on the entity that we want to basically keep it near that particular entity. So when the sheep starts walking off, the pig should eventually follow. They do have a little bit more buffering compared to the other one. So you can see that he's kind of spaced out a little bit more. See if that sheep can... Let's actually grab the lead of the sheep. And you can see that now the pig is following the UUID of that particular one. So we can keep pulling it and it will follow us. So we can do this for multiple entities as well. We just basically assigned it because I don't have a catch for that. So let's go ahead and just grab this chicken here, or we can click on that. Let's grab the entity here, and maybe we can make, so the sheep is following the chicken, and let's store that, and we'll tell the other chicken to follow that chicken. So basically we have like a chain of different entities now following each other. So that chicken's now following that chicken, and this sheep is now following that chicken. Well, it should be. Maybe not. Maybe I forgot to set it up properly. But you can see that they kind of follow each other and stuff. It's pretty cool. But anyhow, yeah, that's about enough of me rambling now. If you are new to my channel, don't forget to subscribe, comment down below, rate the video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching. Peace out.